Welcome to this episode of Beyond the Youth Room podcast. Today, we are covering an important aspect of youth ministry, and that is student leadership, and how to best do that, best practices that we've learned, and pitfalls to avoid. So, with that being said, welcome to this episode. Now, we are jumping right in just a moment, but before we get there, I wanted to share about our sponsor of this podcast, which is Edge Club. Edge Club connects students to Jesus and to the local church, and primarily do that through public school campus ministry. We train students on how to share their gospel and give them a strategy on how to reach their lost friends at public, middle, and high schools. If you're interested in learning more about the training, you can go to edgeclub.org/training, which we have just recently put all of our online training, or all of our training online, so that you can watch it yourself, show it to your youth group, a plug-and-play system so that you guys can train your students on how to share the gospel in their public school. So take a look at that at edgeclub.org/training. Now, let's get right into the topic today. So this is an important discussion today because student leadership is such a catalyst for a movement, not just activity, right? So when we have the mentality that we're the youth leader, they need to just do all the work for us. There's all this pressure, especially if we're a paid youth worker, that we have to do the work of the ministry, that we have to, it's like, what are we paying you for if the students are leading the youth ministry or they're doing all this stuff? And we have a responsibility as a church leader to really equip people for the work of the ministry. And so we're going to talk about some of the nuances of that, some of the experiences that we've had with that. But the biggest thing that I've shifted, this was years ago, I had actually shared a plane ride with Greg Steer, who's the founder of Dare to Share. So we were flying out. I was taking a group of student leaders, to lead the cause, which is in Denver. We were going that year, and Greg was here in DC speaking at an event, and then he was flying back to attend the same event. So he was going back to Denver. We were flying to Denver, and and I had known him, but we hadn't really had that close relationship prior to that. And so anyway, I started talking with them while we were waiting for our to board on the plane. And it happened to be a Southwest Airlines? Yeah, Southwest Airlines flight where you can choose your seat. So as we were talking, I was asking him questions, and he's like, hey, why don't we sit next to each other since we can choose our seats, on the flight over there, and we can talk further. So I was like, yeah, that'd be awesome. So for the whole plane ride to Denver, I picked his brain on a lot of different topics, but one of these was how to choose people that you can invest in, student leaders, and I was sharing with him some of the frustrations. I'm like, the students just don't seem to be getting it. And the ones that do, they just don't feel motivated to really, own the mission. And so as we were talking about that, he actually drew on the back of the seat, not with pen or anything, but just with his finger, in the fabric of the seat, these 4 quadrants. And he actually said, you want to focus on one of these quadrants. And this is what we've really learned from Dare to Share, is focusing on students that are in this quadrant and youth leaders that are in this quadrant. And the 4 quadrants are low skill, low will, meaning they don't know how to do it and they don't care. And so, you have lots of people that might be in in that category in your youth group. The second quadrant is high skill, low will. And these are kind of sometimes the good kids in youth ministry, where they know a lot about the Bible. They're kind of Pharisees in that sense. They're very religious maybe, but they don't care. They don't have a burden for the lost. They don't have a care to serve other people. And then the third quadrant is high will, low skill. And he's like, this is where you want to recruit. This is the type of people that you want to invest in the most time, because they're hungry for it. They just don't know how to do it yet. And that conversation was a huge catalyst for a lot of things we're talking about today. And then the fourth quadrant that you want to get people into is high will, high skill. So they know how to do it, and they care about what they're doing. They're really functioning on all cylinders. And so when it comes to that low skill, high will category, we want to choose the students in our ministries to invest in and to assign leadership. Now, we don't want to, there's biblical principles about not giving too much responsibility to a new believer, but a lot of new believers fit into that category where they're so excited about their faith, but they just don't know how to channel that excitement or that energy into serving. And so when it comes to student leadership, what are some things that you've learned even the past couple of years about student leadership? Because I know even since we've been talking, you've launched a student leadership program, which sounds like a military endeavor. It's called, what is it called? Task Force
1016.
1016. Okay, so describe what you do for student leadership, and how that's really changed your perspective of ministry.
Yeah, so our student leadership, I hesitate to call it a team, but essentially it's a program. And
It's a Navy SEAL team.
yeah, essentially. I can only talk about so much on air, but it's called Task Force 1016. And the reason why we did that is a task force exists to do one thing and one thing only. So if you put together a task force, it has one job, and it's supposed to use all its resources to tackle one job. And so it's Task Force 1016, which comes from Matthew 10:16, which is when Jesus tells his disciples before he sends them out. He says, "Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves." And so our entire program is around just that, equipping students to do the work of the ministry. That's the whole focus. And I actually was thinking about student ministry when I was getting ready to do this. And I don't know if you remember this, but this was actually a conversation with a couple of the leaders in our network. And I'd put together kind of probably the generic like student ministry team of like pick students, meet once a month, talk about what's going well, like stuff. And you guys just kind of blew it out of the water. And we're like, yeah, basically like you can do better than this. And I was like,
we were pretty tough on it.
Yeah, no, but I appreciate it. And it got me excited because I was like, wait, so like, because that's what I'd seen. Like, yeah, these are the kids, like the good kids, church kids. They meet once a month. Here's what we like. Here's what we don't like. Here's maybe we could. It kind of a sounding board essentially. And when the feedback was like, yeah, like I think this could be a lot more. And I was like, man, like so. Then it was kind of cool because like so I can just go ahead and create my own thing. Like, I don't need to do kind of the church model of like let's all sit around a table and talk. And so we were kind of like, okay, what does this look like? So yeah, we came up with Task Force 1016, and the way it works is it is a year-long program, so the school year. And we started it by just saying, we talked about the high will, low skill. So we're like, do we want to invite kids? Do we want to pick kids? Do we want to, just ask kids? And we ended up just standing in front of the youth group and just saying, anybody who wants to do this can do this. But we described it in a way that was realistic, and I think we did a lot of kids out where it's like, yeah, I don't think I want to put that much work into this. And so it's really nice because in youth group, it's hard to hold kids accountable because they might be coming for so many different reasons. But having a leadership team is so nice because you can hold them accountable because you say, no.
You committed to this.
Yes, absolutely. And we actually have them sign a contract. We call it an enlistment form.
Where
it has, and they have to sign it and their parents have to sign it. And so it's a school year long program. We meet once a month. And we started out with 5 students, and we had 4 students graduate. There wasn't like anything wrong with the 5th kid. It just wasn't.
The other one died during the training. It was like,
training
it's too intense.
But no, it was a big commitment. And I think he realized that, and he's like, "Oh, like this might have been more than I thought it was." And that was okay. He's still part of our ministry and a great kid. But we meet once a month, and we meet for about 2.5 hours, and we meet 4 youth groups, so it makes it easy. But all the kids come, and we have training where we are going through various aspects of how to share the gospel, how to build your faith, and I actually give them a insight into what our youth group looks like. So that's the students where we've talked about 4-chair discipleship. I give them an
metrics.
Helping to measure spiritual growth. I give them an inside look as to where we are as a ministry. Obviously, I don't talk about individual students, but where we are as a ministry, and they can start to piece together. And so it's been really, really cool. But those 4 graduated. We've now added 3 more, and those 4 students have come back. And so every time we run the program, I shift the program. So last year was kind of based on Dan Spader's Live Like Jesus, his 7 things that Jesus did for his disciples that we see in Jesus' prayer in John 17. And so we walked through those. But then kids have challenges. So then we challenged them and said, okay, so if Christ revealed the Father to his disciples, what does it look like for you to reveal God to your friends? And so we challenged them to do that. And then they would come back and say, this is how I revealed Christ, to those around me. Jesus prayed for his disciples. So we kept kind of adding and adding and adding, and they had to read like a lot of reading. Like they read 4 books, and we got to sit around and talk about them. But the big thing that we focused on is information versus transformation. I think a lot of it is, and we've had this conversation many times, we can give you information all day long, but transformation is really what the gospel is about, transforming lives. And so we don't want it to become just here's a training. It's really become an accountability group. And it's really cool because it's kind of like almost accountability for me as well. If I'm challenging kids, hey, who'd you share the gospel with this month? Or, how are you doing in your reading plan? How are you doing, with your walk with the Lord? Like, it's a time for me to, we have to be so careful as youth leaders of staying here and not coming down to students. But it's been so nice to be able to, in some ways, kind of come down here and be honest when it's like, yeah, I've kind of been struggling. So like, I appreciate you guys are holding me accountable and doing this. It's been really, really cool. So yeah, we said, anybody wants to join, there's an application process. And then we went for it, and it was really, really cool. Kids love it. And just continuing to do it and add more kids.
Now, when I hear this, it sounds like a lot of work.
Yes.
It sounds like a lot of hard work that you've put into developing a student leadership team.
Yeah.
So talk to the youth leader out there
Mm-hmm.
that might even be working another job, that might be overwhelmed as it is, and they're thinking to themselves, I can't do more.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't even keep up with what I'm already doing.
Yeah.
What are some benefits that you saw? And I know the answer to this too, because like I've seen this but what are some things that, in other words, like, why is it worth the extra work?
Yeah.
And how can this actually help?
Yes.
How has this helped you when it comes to, your own sanity, even though it's been hard work to get things started and up and running? So tell us a little about that.
You need to do it because Jesus invested in a few, and we must invest in a few. So when we talk about the 80-20 principle, where 80% of your results come from 20% of your work, your student leadership team should absolutely be in that 20% of work that results in 80% of the results. And so what it allowed me to do is essentially go, I can't invest in every kid at youth group, but I can invest in these kids. And, Jesus had 120. He really had 12, and within that 12, he had 3. And so this is kind of your Peter, James, and John. Like, these are the students that you're really able to pour into, and it multiplies your efforts and goes further than anything you could do on your own, because you're literally replicating yourself into these students and then challenging them to go and do it. So for somebody who's gone, I just don't have the time, this isn't possible. I mean, we meet once a month. We're not meeting once a week.
Yeah.
We meet once a month, and we're really challenging kids to do that, but it takes the impact so much further outside of just that. And once you have kids who get it and can kind of see what you're trying to do, now they start to do that with their friends on their level as well. And so I definitely think it's a high impact thing where we can just, by investing in a few, that's how it can really grow the ministry. And it's not a burden. It's an exciting time where we really get to go deeper with the students who have committed to doing that.
Yeah, and through that too, like, it's so easy to get things going at first, but the challenging thing is like to continue it. And you're right, to remain faithful, to get them to continue to do the things or to be excited about it. Especially if you're only meeting once a month. One of the things that I found, and I got this from a good friend of mine, Bill Russell, who started kind of a student leadership organization called the Collision Project, which we ended up using. They had it was almost like a 12-week boot camp, like a spiritual boot camp thing called Resilient Outcast. Okay. Called it RO training. And basically it was a 12-week commitment. So like a semester long, where memorize scripture every week. You learn different theology, like we called it the 5 bullets. So the 5 theologies that we would take a bullet for. And then they memorized the Nicene Creed. There's like some intensive stuff that we did during that time. And each week they went over accountability, like with their verses and their stuff. And so it was like a high level, it was a really deep, in-depth thing. One thing I learned from him specifically was the idea of how do you continue to invest in people, like to keep them engaged, keep them, accountable. And I think where kind of things fall off a little bit is when we don't have one or more of these things at play. So the 3 things are accountability, expectations, and relational investment. And I think if we combine all those 3, and this applies to volunteer leadership, this applies to like just regular youth ministry too, but especially with student leadership, set the expectations. So in other words, like you did that, like you actually outlined this commitment level, like where it's like, okay, this is what we're doing. Yeah. And they understood those are the expectations. And if I don't meet those expectations, this is where the second part comes in. I'll be held accountable to those expectations. So what is the consequence of that? Well, you can't serve in this group if you're not, meeting this expectation. And some people, might shy away from that because they think it's legalistic, or, and remember, legalism is to try to earn your way to God. Like, legalism is trying to do things, but to train in godliness is a biblical command. And we wouldn't say to a track coach, why are you trying to get the kids to shave off time on their mile? Like, what are you, like, why are you trying to improve them? Like, no, like, that's like part of what they're committing to.
They signed up for
They
it.
signed up for it. And now it'd be one thing if you're like, hey, you can't be part of the youth group at all unless you memorize a verse every week or whatever. It's like, of course there's grace like between different levels, but if they're signing up to commitment to it, to train for godliness, then that's a different level of commitment. So you have expectation, you have accountability, and then that relational investment. So if you're not relationally investing in these students and kind of, spending special time with them, as far as like, that's why you do like once a month meetings, then it's going to be hard for them to want to like serve in that way because they think you're a dictator. If you're, so if you just set the expectation to hold people accountable without any relational connection, then they're just going to see you as a dictator and not like a friend that they're really trying to serve alongside of. And so with that, student leadership is a way that we can, one, give away responsibilities like in our own ministry for them to own the ministry. So those are some of the benefits. But also it's a way to train them towards godliness so that they're growing the relationship in a more intentional way.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are some things that, like, what are some beginner steps? So some of us might not be able to do like an intensive program, like, Navy SEAL Task Force 1016 or whatever. What are some beginner steps that people can do with student leadership to kind of, maybe even help identify students that might want to go deeper and further, in their relationship with the Lord and their capacity to serve. So what are some beginning steps of roles that you can hand off to student leaders? Are there different requirements spiritually for people that you would ask to serve as a student in your ministry? And things like that. So like what are some beginner stages that you can start to assign roles to student leaders?
Well, we need to understand what we're doing for student leadership team, because I think we say a lot of different things. For task force, we're aiming higher than student serving in our ministry, in the sense of we don't view our student leadership team as these are the kids who get to clean up or help set up or even lead small groups. I mean,
you get to clean the toilet.
Correct. Yeah, you're part of our student leadership team, so you get to run the snack bar and you get to be a greeter. Like, we view it much higher than that. And so somebody might need to ask that question of, okay, when I'm starting a student leadership team or standing this up, what is the purpose of doing this? We want it to not be an institution. We want it to be a movement. So what we essentially want is it to be a catalyst amongst the students to be contagious to lead other students. But when it comes to serving in ministry, they do have special privileges that come with being a part of the student leadership team. And not privileges as in, anything to lord over. But for instance, if, we're looking at a missions trip, if they're in task force, then, hey, we know you're good to go. You're, if you want to go, you have a spot, those types of things. But yeah, for somebody who's just looking for somebody to help, share the work and to pass on ministry, I mean, there's no moral requirement to stack chairs. There's no moral requirement to, run the snack bar. Well, maybe if there's money involved, but there are tiers, there are levels. Anytime that there is discipleship happening, that's where we want to say we're gonna draw a higher standard here. So I think if you're at a point where you're just so busy and you need to hand over things to kids, I think you can start there, and that's a simple place, is start handing them small things, but make it seem important, because it is. Hey, if the chairs don't get set up on time, like, we have to take time out of the teaching in order to do this. Or, hey, if nobody's smiling when somebody walks through the door to greet them and make them feel welcome, they're not going to come back. So start small with handing off things. But I would say, if you could dream, if this is what success looks like, how do you get there and reverse engineer it? And so here's where we want to get to. We might not be able to get there yet, but how can we start doing that? And then you start to provide smaller opportunities where, hey, he who is faithful over little will be faithful over much. If somebody is greeting and they're just like a rock star, they're just really hitting it off, then you've now identified somebody as, hey, this might be a good situation where we could call them to more, because they've shown they have the will, and they might start developing the skill in order to do this. If you ask kids to help you set up or run a game, and you just see, hey, this student is really great with the younger students. Well, now hey, this might be somebody we want to call into a middle school small group and help a leader kind of engage with them and bridge that gap. So I think when you start to give small opportunities, you'll be able to start to see, because will is a hard thing to judge. I mean, everybody wants a position of authority and influence. But when a kid really shows that they have the will to serve, they want to make a difference, then they'll start to identify themselves if you provide opportunities for that to happen.
Yeah. Well, I think we often, like we communicate without words sometimes in how we treat students and student leadership. So if we are adult heavy, meaning like we're only allowing adults to serve in our ministry, then there can be a consumer mindset within the students that like, okay, the adults serve us, and there's less ownership involved. And so I think we're communicating things even if we're not saying that, or even if we're not even vocalizing that like to our own self, like if we don't even believe that, we can by actions almost, say things about what we believe students are capable of. And so what I've found is that when you involve students in leadership, whether that's, a simple thing like asking them to pick up, Bibles for the tables, for the, studies, whatever, or to, to help, tear down the chairs or whatever, or set up the chairs. Everybody kind of has like a potential for a role, in other words, in that way, the potential to serve. But then, as you're saying, when it comes to spiritual leadership, we obviously have more requirements for that as far as like, sitting down and talk with them about like their lifestyle and how they're going in a relationship with Christ. And I've been fortunate in our current context right now in ministry, we have a middle school program that's almost 100% led by our high schoolers. So our high school students understand the aspect of discipleship to younger people. And it's we have table discussions and they lead the discussions. So like we teach for a little bit and then there's table discussions. We teach for a little bit more and then there's table discussions. And so they've done exceptionally well. Like it's been a very functional way to identify even leaders. And now as we're coming up on, winter camp season for us, we're actually seeing that a lot of these table leaders, they've been proven grounds for who can sign up as a co-leader to lead with an adult at camp as a high schooler, leading middle school students. And so we've been able to see that because it's almost like a farm team. Like we're seeing like, okay, who's the best at leading discussions and talking with students and encouraging them in their faith. And some of them have younger siblings and stuff that they're doing that with already, but it's a great way to identify, students that can serve in greater capacity and have that high will. And usually if they're faithful and showing up, you can kind of see if they're doing it just for the recognition or if they're doing it to pad their college resumes, which we see that a lot too. It's like, hey, I need to have some things on my resume, like my college application saying that I serve with my local church. Can I do that? And that's obviously a different category than people that are like genuinely trying to invest in other people spiritually. And so when it comes to some of the pushback that people might have with developing a student leadership team is the mentality that it might create like a clique or that like these are the elite group and this is the rest. Like what are some ways that you've combated that or like try to make that not a reality in your own youth group where these are like the good kids, like these are the ones that I'm investing more time in, to not make it seem like they're favorites. So tell us about that.
Well, the nice thing about what we do is everybody's invited. Everybody's, able to join it. But we're going to make the barrier to entry so high that most kids are going to say, yeah, that's not really for me. So that's the nice part. And something I'd encourage, you might think who God is really working in, but until you really make that open. And there were some kids that applied where we were able to have conversations and they were kind of able to see like, yeah, maybe I'm not quite ready for this. But I think how to kind of keep that from happening is, number one, we don't stand up these kids and say, here are the golden kids. Like, why can't you be more like these kids? I mean, we meet before youth group, but we have our own group that we communicate in, that we plan things in. So it's not like we're standing up in front of all the kids saying like, okay, if you're in this, like, if you have a student leadership team and you're constantly saying, all right, student leaders, then everybody's going to kind of get I'm not a leader, so I can't lead. And you're going to create kind of a caste system. So we kind of do that not in a public manner. We celebrate wins in a public manner. We want to say, hey, look, like, share your experience of what it was like to do these things, but we don't want to stand them up and say, hey, look at them. So that's kind of nice where, we don't have an org chart on like our bulletin board in the youth room of like,
Yeah.
here's our student
Here's our
leader
hierarchy.
Yeah. But that's what's been really helpful. So having it open to everybody in some capacity. So even if you're like, but I don't want everybody, I get that. We don't, it's not a place for everybody. But if you open it to everybody, then you can have that conversation with that kid of like, hey, I just don't think you're ready for it, and here's why. And I did have that conversation with a student. The second thing is again, don't point to them. Let it be. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. And then thirdly, I think servant leadership. I mean, that's what Jesus instructed for us too. Is, if we have prideful people in ministry, it's not going to go well. And so we want to start that at a young age to say, hey, pride goes before the fall. It's like we have to be so careful to guard against that. Yeah. And so this is not I'm a student leader. This is hey, no, God has allowed you to follow his example by coming to the humblest of beginnings, so that others can have life. Yeah. And we want to deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow him. So I think sharing that message with students from the very onset, then they kind of get that in their head of like, oh, so this isn't like they see political office at school of like, well, there's the president and they have their name on the posters and they get to make these decisions. It's like, that's not really what we're going for here. We're going for people who are going to take the gospel forward and to start right in our own youth group to do that.
Yeah. Ones that are just leading the calls like in their own regard. Absolutely. And one of the things that I've seen over the years that's been beneficial is, and I even tell this to adult leaders, is to allow a safe failure.
Yes.
Within the student leaders.
Yeah. And
what I mean by that is sometimes we assign something, but then just at the point where it's like we think that like it's like, well, we can't allow them to not be ready to succeed in that way. So we're just going to step in and do it for them.
Yeah.
And I think we do them a disservice if we don't allow that safe failure. And so I'll give you an example. So I had a student that I had assigned to lead games. So every time we had like youth group, like he'd come ready for the game. I even like called him the game ninja or whatever, or the fun ninja. That's what it was. And so he was the one that like would come ready for a game. And so the first time when I'd asked him to do that, he was like, yeah, and he got really excited about it. But I knew that he wasn't like as dependable as like other people. And so I was like, I'm just going to allow it to like play it out to see. So I didn't even prepare a game, like as a backup, just in case. So he came and I was like, hey, do you have a game ready? And he's like, oh, no, like I totally forgot. And I was like, okay, you just won't have a game. He's like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, did you have a game ready? And he's like, no. And I'm like, then we won't have a game tonight. And he's like, what? Like he didn't he just was expecting me to like jump in and like do it for him.
Well, that's what most parents do for their kids is like, keep doing this, keep doing this.
Yep. Yeah. And so when it comes to that, like it was a huge learning lesson for him. I think as an adult, as he grew into an adult, he's now an adult now and is married. And like, I'm sure that was a catalyst moment.
He always has a game ready.
He always has a game ready. Like, no, but in that sense, like by allowing him to fail, he really saw like, whoa, this is my responsibility. And so I think we do them a disservice if we have a backup plan, if we, and that meant that our program wasn't that great that night, as far as, the fun ninja aspect of it, or whatever, did not have a game. And we just pivoted and just kept moving. And people even asked, like, and it's not like I threw him under the bus. So it's like, well, this guy didn't bring a game, so we're not doing it. I was just like, hey, we're just not doing one tonight. It's okay. We'll do it next week. And he never forgot again. And I never had a backup plan again either. Like he always remembered. And, so it was just a way for him to realize like, okay, this is my responsibility. And if I don't do it, then no one will. And I think that was a big deal for him. Yeah. And it was kind of a turning point in our ministry too, because other people saw that too. They're like, okay, like if Keith asked me to do something, like, and I say that I'm going to do it, like, I need to follow through. And so with that, we have a responsibility to equip students for the work of the ministry, and we have a responsibility to to delegate too, like just like in that Aaron Moses type of aspect of we can't do it all. And we surely can't do it all well. Yeah. And so when it comes to, giving away responsibilities to student leaders, I think that's a huge untapped resource. So to answer that question that I asked earlier about someone that might say, I'm too busy to start this, I think you're too busy not to start this. Yeah. And to really see that we need to invest in a few, what we wish we could do for many. And I think that's a temptation too. It's like, well, we can't invest in this level with everybody, so we're not going to do it at all. And I think that's a very limited perspective when we even see how Jesus did. He's like, he invested in a few so that they would reach many.
Yeah.
And so if we have a mentality, I think we can't go wrong with equipping this next generation to own their own ministry.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, anything else you wanted to add before we close?
Get started. Yeah. No, just
Get started today.
see, don't, dream. Like with see what God's up to, and you don't have to do what everybody else is doing. Do what God is calling you to do for your ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this concludes another episode of Beyond the Youth Room podcast. We are hopefully training you to equip students to own and share the gospel of Jesus Christ, to advance the gospel in your area. Again, if you want to be trained in this area of reaching more students in public schools, edgeclub.org/training is a way that you can go and see some free training that we've put together for you. And that's in that sense, we also want to share this with more people. So if you've benefited from any of this content, the past couple months, we've reached over 25,000 people with our content across our platforms, and we want to see even more. And if you have benefited from it, like, share, comment, all that helps the algorithms to get seen by more people. So thank you so much for tuning in today.